Greetings adventurers, and welcome to the Loot Goblin Marketplace. There are a lot of positives to playing Dungeons & Dragons in person, and it's actually my preferred method to play. Although I love myself a beautiful battle map on Roll20, nothing really beats some miniatures and physical props for me. But there can be some big downsides to playing in person, such as you sharing a small coffee table with others. No matter the size of the party, there's a chance that both their hands, and even worse, their odors, can enter your personal space. When it comes to holding a successful in-person campaign, communication is extremely important, and sometimes phrases like "stop touching my stuff" and "don't come back until you put on deodorant" may sound harsh, but those conversations need to be had. We're trying to play D&D here, not participating in a Smash tournament. Try to be mindful and keep your hands and odors to yourself. Today's treasure was submitted to lootgoblinstories@gmail.com and goes by the name My Riveting Tale of Betrayal and Filth. Hello Goblin and company. I hope you enjoy this tale because I sure didn't. Our journey begins with our D&D group, a slowly growing party that was about to embark on a wonderful Curse of Strahd adventure. Our Dungeon Master did a hell of a job. It was enjoyable despite what to come, after finishing up our last campaign. Although the DM, Frodo, who's a male that's 19, ran the game, I, a male who's 20, hosted it due to my basement having an ideal countertop for TTRPG gameplay, and a large screen to watch some horror movies and play Jackbox on afterward. Everything was well and good until he brought in a new guy, who we'll call Smeagol, an 18-year-old male. Now, I had a bad feeling about Smeagol from the start. Unlike the character I named him after, he was an extremely heavy person. This will be important later, and somehow managed to always smell awful. Despite sitting as far away from him as I could, I would still get wafts of his stench from across the table from time to time. Now, despite this, Smeagol didn't seem too bad at first. His character fit in pretty well with our setting, and I told myself that I could put up with the smell because I didn't want to make a big deal out of it and ruin anything for the group. The campaign moved along nicely, and the only real issues I saw with Smeagol in-game was how he would sometimes try to get another player to play their character the way he wanted. Eventually, the character gave up their life for their sister, which was Smeagol's new character, who used to be dead but after his sacrifice would be resurrected. From the start, a number of issues began to arise. Firstly, she was a 60-year-old character who looked about 14. I pointed out to Frodo, the Dungeon Master, that this seemed a bit off, but we didn't think it would be a huge deal. The other issue was that he was playing a homebrew class that turned out to be ridiculously overpowered. Another issue that arose was that his character Smeagol would act out of character and put his own character's motives above the entire main story, to the point where she would attempt to leave the entire group behind in order to do something important to her character. He also had her moonwalk on a town wall. Apparently, she could walk on walls, which neatly got us barred from entering. Eventually, Frodo had him rework the character into a sorcerer that ended up still being overpowered and min-max to hell, but it was indeed an improvement. Around this point, I started telling Frodo that sometimes he should just start telling Smeagol no when he wanted to do something ridiculously out of character, since he had a habit of holding up the story with his shenanigans. Eventually, that character sacrificed herself to bring her brother back, which brought him back to his original character. During the Baba Lysaga fight, she cast some sort of illusion that caused him to see her as his sister, which persisted after she was killed. This caused his character to become enraged and attack the party, which made sense, but he tried to drag it out for too long. We were trying to reason with him in character, saying, "It's us, we're your friends, don't you understand?" But he kept trying to kill us. He was laughing about how he thought he might be able to kill our party. There were 5 people aside from him, by the way. And finally, after about an hour, it ended and his character came to their senses, but not without Frodo having to talk some sense into him first. After that, Frodo asked to see his sheet, as he was doing oddly well against a party of 5. It turned out he was taking max HP every level up because the app I use for the sheet doesn't let me roll HP. This was definitely a lie, and the fact that he seemed to treat this blatant cheating as if it was not a big deal bothered us all. After he left, we all had sort of a meeting where we talked about how he needed to get a grip and stop cheating and play in character better. Still, he would make it so that his character viewed mine as some sort of adversary, despite my character only ever doing good for the group and not doing anything to harm him. He would also do this later in the campaign, which he was only present for 3 sessions before we decided we didn't want him around anymore, claiming that his character didn't trust mine after my character literally saved his life. Okay, so we're about halfway into the story and we haven't seen the worst of it just yet, but there's already so many things that are like common tropes for a problem player. Take for example the fact that they have main character syndrome. They're totally willing to completely derail the campaign if it means getting their character moments that they're focused on, and they could care less about the party. You have to remember too, especially when it's like a pre-established adventure like Curse of Strahd, you are on the guard guardrails a little bit, and mattering on the party, that can be a total bonus. Some people really like knowing where they're going to end up in the story, and they bring a character that they feel like can grow and interact with the setting that ends up really complementing the setting instead of trying to take over it, become the main character, the most important part. Let's be honest, in Curse of Strahd, the main character is Strahd. It's in the name. He shows up like 20 times in the module. Smeagol's character will never be the main character of Curse of Strahd, no matter how hard they try. And when it comes to the combat, yeah, they played something homebrew. I'm glad that they were willing to change when the Dungeon Master talked to them. I'd be curious if they even ran it by the Dungeon Master ahead of time, or if they just vaguely said, oh, I want to play this class, it's totally fine. Because it seems like Frodo, for the first time's looking at their character sheet after they re-rolled the Sorcerer, and they're definitely beefing up their character more than they should be on the character sheet. I find often in D&D, if people tend to lie on the small things, they're tending to lie on the big things as well. Keeping your character sheet hidden from the Dungeon Master is always kind of an indicator that you think you're more important than the rest of the table. You don't have to play by the same rules as them. So yeah, let's just see how much worse this story gets. After Frodo had a talk with Smeagol, he seemed to start doing better with staying in character, but issues outside the game kept getting worse. Remember how I mentioned he was a really heavy guy? Well, the chair he was using literally gave way under him one session. The base split in half and the legs collapsed. At this point, I was still hosting in my parents' house, and this was one of their chairs, which really bothered me, but obviously it wasn't intentional, so I didn't give him too much shit about it. After that, he sat in a metal chair, but began a habit of scraping the chair back and forth on the floor. I didn't notice it until after the session, but he had caused some very visible scratches in the wood flooring. The worst part about it was that he looked down there to grab his water bottle and dropped dice multiple times during the session, but didn't even stop. For a good half of these sessions, I would buy 4 pizzas from Little Caesars for the whole group, which I thought would be enough. It was like less than $20, but I wanted to give my friends a nice gift to make the session even more enjoyable. However, Smeagol decided to eat 2 entire pizzas. I told him he can't do that again as it's for everyone, which is 7 people, and that he doesn't even contribute a single cent on the food. Despite this, he did it again and again and again, until eventually I started rationing the slices by saying everyone gets a certain amount to be equal, even splitting odd slices. Okay, so this guy's just as inconsiderate out of game as he is in game. I'm glad the author here mentions that it's not really his fault that the first chair broke, it's something that's unintentional. And honestly, when it comes to the metal chair scraping, maybe the first time he didn't notice, because I know when I reach down for things, I'm not really paying too much attention to something like that. But obviously this guy has a clear pattern where he's inconsiderate, he gets told outright not to do something, and then he keeps doing it. So obviously every time after the first session where he's scraping the chair, it's totally on him. In a lot of these stories, I feel like the Dungeon Master and the host tend to be the same person. This story is a little bit different where you are a fellow player, but you're the host, and you're asking small things of them, as someone that owns a house that he's not respecting. And then when Frodo asks small things in-game as the Dungeon Master, he's not respecting that as well, which really reinforces the fact that he's not considerate at all to anyone, really. If I was either the host or the Dungeon Master in this situation, I probably have already seen enough to kick him out of the table, but let's see the finale. After a long journey, we had finally beaten Strahd, and we had some really neat character moments that were very well made by Frodo. Everyone went home and I started cleaning up, but I noticed something horrifying. The floor had somehow been scratched at least 10 times worse this session. I don't know what it was that made it this bad, but after this specific session, he had left huge deep scratches all over the area under his chair. At this point, I banned him from returning to my house, which wasn't a really big deal since he was moving a town over and didn't have a vehicle. All was at peace again as he wouldn't be able to come for our next session, but this peace wouldn't last long. For whatever reason, I had my suspicions as what the reason was. He had to move out of his new place and ended up staying with Frodo temporarily. Frodo felt bad for him because he seemed like he needed some support, and Frodo thought that he just needed a stable place to stay while he got a job and learned to become self-sufficient. Frodo was moving to an apartment closer to his college campus in August, so Smeagol had a few months to stay with him until then, and he would have to find a more long-term place to stay. It seemed like things were going to get better until I started hearing about how Smeagol was behaving. The guy wouldn't get a job, nor do work around the house. He stayed up late playing video games and slept until the afternoon every day. He only ever showered when Frodo or Frodo's dad, we'll call him Bilbo, told him he had to, and changed his clothes very rarely. I told Frodo he should tell Smeagol he has to get his act together or he'll kick him out. It seemed like the push he needed to actually take initiative and better himself, and Frodo said he'd have a talk with him. A week or two later, Frodo messaged me saying that they had found out something about Smeagol that had disturbed him, and that something had him and Bilbo contemplating burning the couch and beanbag chairs. I was curious because I also had to throw out couch pillows at my house due to his stench clinging to them. What could Smeagol be doing that was so awful, you may wonder? Well, he was shitting his pants and just living in it for days on end. Turns out that's why he smelled so bad all the time. He had no reason to do this as he didn't have a medical condition that affected his bowel movements, and he always had access to a bathroom. Why was he doing this? I have no idea. None of us do. I genuinely think that it was just out of pure laziness, like he didn't want to get up to stop playing video games, so he would just shit his pants. When Bilbo went to do the laundry, he'd find entire turds in Smeagol's pants that he had left to be Bilbo's problem. Frodo and Bilbo were done with Smeagol's literal shit, and were about to kick him out. Thankfully, Smeagol's mom wanted to move him back in with her. Smeagol left, but not before trying to pawn off his last load of laundry to Bilbo, who thankfully took it out of the basket and put it back with the rest of Smeagol's things, which hopefully he then proceeded to incinerate, cause dear god that's awful. After that, Frodo and I decided we didn't want Smeagol back in our houses ever again, and he was taken out of all ongoing and future campaigns. He was finally kicked from the Discord server after Frodo had found out that he was talking shit, yes, pun intended, about Bilbo, who graciously offered him a place to stay to friends who also knew Frodo and saw right through it. At this point, Frodo and I were both done with Smeagol, and this only solidified our positions. The only reason he lasted so long in the group was because Frodo believed there was good in him, but Smeagol spat on his friendship. It was an appalling journey, and I am so glad that it's finally over. Thank you sincerely for reading my tale. I hope it was thrilling and enjoyable. I bid you and all listeners farewell and good tidings in your future endeavors. Thank you for those kind words at the end, author, and I want to thank you again for submitting your story. This one was sent to lootgoblinstories@gmail.com. I've actually been covering a ton of them on the channel. I think there's like 5 in the last 2 months I've covered. I always feel really sorry when I hear a story like this though, because I hate my viewers to go through something this awful. Honestly, one of the craziest things about this story is if you really think about it, the last few paragraphs have nothing to do with D&D. I find that it's very common that a lot of the RPG horror stories that happen that are related to D&D, it really doesn't have much to do about the in-game aspects itself. Yeah, sometimes the game brings out the worst in people. If they're a bit of a narcissist, they want to be the main character, everything becomes about them and it's like hyper focused because it's like a fantasy setting and they say, how dare you tell me I can't do this in a setting where anything's possible. There's also been a few times truthfully where the problem player is just straight up a criminal where it's like, yeah, you could have handled the table a little bit better in that session, I guess. But when a guy commits assault and battery on 3 people, I don't really think it's D&D, you know? This is one of those stories where the problem exists out of game, so you know you're not crazy, you know it wasn't you handling D&D wrong. I mean, you have to remember, Bilbo wasn't in the campaign at all, and he probably got the worst of it, right? So it's really not an issue that you guys did at the table. As the host, you want to be nice. Frodo also wanted to see the good in him. I can see why you picked the names Frodo and Smeagol in this case. Anything that man touched, you have to cast into the fire because it's never recovering. Genuinely one of the most cursed stories I've read. There are people that sometimes have a medical condition that have odors, and it's not something they really can control, and they're nice guys, so you want them around at the table. Even for those people, it's not rude at all to say, hey, before you come, can you do a couple things to make it a little bit better? There is a reason that conventions and fighting tournaments now kind of outright say in the rules that, hey, you have to maintain basic hygiene, you have to wear deodorant, you have to take a shower before you come to this event. Genuinely, anyone that pushes back on that is someone that you probably don't want at the table anyways. It comes off as a little harsh, but the odor is so much harsher, so I think they're gonna have to live with it. Please feel free to comment below. If you guys have your own story to share as well, I always love reading them. Make sure to like and share the video to help it grow. If you want to become a member or subscribe to the channel, I'd really appreciate it. I hope to see you guys in the next video. Farewell for now. Have you ever been doing campaign prep and had an idea that you loved but you couldn't find the right map? Or has your session ever gone in a direction you haven't prepared for but want to provide a fun encounter that feels like it was planned all along? dScryb is perfect as a tool to supplement and enhance homebrew campaigns and adventure books with its huge library of read-aloud text and film-quality ambience, sound effects, and music. Imagine a scenario where your party is supposed to be investigating a monster in the forest that is terrorizing the town, but an offhand comment you made about a goblin camp camp has the party captivated. Now you need to come up with a goblin camp on the fly or the party is going to be disappointed, and you don't know where to begin. If you use today's sponsor dScryb, you can come up with a quick battle map, a great description, and the perfect ambient music. They'll think that you planned it from the start. Use Loot Goblin when selecting your plan and get a free 30-day trial on any of the plans. So you can take it for a spin for your next session and see if you found it helpful without any risk. Click the link in the description and check out dScryb now.